stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort, and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Some things are harder to do than you think. Be kind. I had performed the National Anthem at baseball games a few times that summer as a duet with my close friend and as a trio with that friend and my sister. Each time we performed together, we heard rave reviews. As we walked away from home plate toward the fence and the bleachers, our home team would come up out of the dugout to high-five us. When I was asked to perform the anthem by myself later that summer, I decided to challenge myself and go for it, even though it was pretty scary to me. I practiced and practiced in the shower, in the car, and as I made dinner. I had been a professional vocalist for a couple of years, getting paid to perform in a few bands at small to medium-sized venues, so I didn't think it would be too different from those experiences. Well, sure, I was nervous, but not too nervous. After all, I was a professional. That afternoon, a wildfire had kicked up just north and west of our town, and the smoke was beginning to filter into the city and the valley east of the fire. By 6:45, when I arrived at the ballpark to sing at 7, with the first pitch scheduled for 7:05, the sky was an odd gray and yellowish color. I totally underestimated what that might do to my voice. I walked confidently, all by myself, to home plate, as I had done with my friend and my sister a few times before. I adjusted the microphone to my mouth, and I could feel my knees shaking. I took a few deep breaths to calm my nerves. The last time I had performed the anthem with my friend at that ballpark, we had agreed that there wasn't a huge hurry to begin. She said, "We start when we're ready." And we did. We had taken just a moment to look at each other, breathe deeply, and establish our starting note. I did the same thing that evening, taking a moment to breathe and prepare myself. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? And as I lifted my head, pressed up slightly onto my toes to hit that high note, over the land of the free, that's the high note, and the home of the brave, my voice faltered and cracked on that high note. The smoke had done its damage. I hit the note, yes, but not well. The home of the brave? Phew, I nailed that ending, but no one heard that part. They were still focused on the damaged note, free. Walking back past the dugout, not a single ball player came out to high-five me, not a single one. They were quiet. I made my way through the gate toward the bleachers, and my son, who was 8 at the time, said, "Mom, I thought you were great." I said, "Thanks, Max, but I know that high note didn't quite work." He looked down, scuffed the toe of his shoe against the ground, and said, "Yeah, I know." He looked sheepishly up toward some women in the bleachers. I heard them laugh and say stuff. My face flushed. I was embarrassed for myself, but I was angry for him. What did you think of that?" It made me angry. I know it's hard to sing that song. I answered, "That's right, Max. And if you hear something like that again, no matter who is performing, I would encourage you to say something like, 'Hey, that's rude. Could you do it? Could you sing the national anthem all by yourself into a microphone on home plate to a stadium full of people?'" He smiled and told me he would do that next time. The ballpark manager came up to me a moment later and mentioned he didn't have a singer for the next evening's game and asked if I'd come back tomorrow. Everything in me said, "No way." But I looked at Max and I said yes. I knew if I said no, he'd see it as giving up. I asked the manager, "You did just hear that, right? You heard me not quite hit that note?" "Yes, but the rest of the version was lovely, and I know you'll be fine tomorrow." So I did. I went back the next evening, feeling the urge to redeem myself, for me and for Max. And I nailed it. It took me a while to recover from that experience and to fully process my feelings about it. But at some point, as I remember blushing after hearing what Max said, the feeling of embarrassment and anger, I was transported to a moment just a few years before that when I might have made someone feel that way. I wasn't snickering. I didn't say anything to my friend next to me, but I do remember making kind of weird faces with her as another woman was singing in front of us. I told myself she didn't see us. I told myself she didn't know what those expressions were about. But as I thought about my experience at the ballpark, I knew I was that woman in my recent past. And at that moment, I resolved never to be that person again. What an awful realization. Now, quite a few years later, I had an opportunity to shift this dynamic for someone else. We were sitting in the bleachers of a stadium, watching our younger son graduate from high school, and the valedictorians took the stage to speak. The first one began, and I could hear her voice trembling. Her tongue was tied a few times. A few words got mixed up and didn't make quite the sense that she had intended. And there were at least 1,000 people in the audience, plus the 360 graduates, her peers, the high school band, and most of the faculty and lots of administrators. From behind me, I heard, "Ugh, this does not give me much hope for the class of 2019. I felt my face flush with embarrassment for the young woman on the stage, all alone with that microphone and over 1,000 people watching and listening to her. I turned around. "Excuse me. There are at least 1,000 people here watching and listening to this young woman on the stage with a microphone. I'm a professional speaker, and this would make me nervous. Could you do this without being nervous?" I turned back around, expecting our older son sitting next to me to be completely embarrassed by his mother's comment to a stranger, but he wasn't. He smiled at me with encouragement and pride. I didn't notice the reaction of that person behind me. I just continued to look forward and listen to the speeches, and of course shouted with the rest of my family as our son's name was called and he walked across the stage, a fresh, new high school graduate. So I'm asking you, have you been the one making faces, snickering, whispering with friends while another human was performing or speaking? Do you think about whether you could be with the one with the microphone? Do you think about whether you could do better? Look, life is difficult enough without the peanut gallery taking us down when we put ourselves out there, taking a risk, and demonstrating vulnerability like that. Maybe it's time for all of us to grow up just a little and choose to be supportive and encouraging instead. Do you like yourself when you're like that? Do you feel good about yourself? Don't you like yourself more when you're the one that encourages and inspires people? Besides, who would you rather spend time with? That person who snickers and makes fun of people? Or the one who claps, smiles, and encourages them to go on? Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Could you tell me that you're going away? Don't say